UFC Vegas 46, we have what's left of the card after cancellations, postponements, replacement fights falling through. So now we're going to take our final look at this slate, talk about what we need to do to be successful on this card, and really just give you the final picks of the week. You can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. If you haven't had the chance yet, go back and watch the first look video from earlier this week. That's where we go over the fight salary by salary. We talk about spots that we like, spots that we don't like, but that's more of a full card breakdown. For this final picks video, we're going to be looking at some things that we need to do to be successful on the card, but more importantly, we're going to take a look at how to build some lineups this week and what to do with these recent changes that have come. And as always, if you've been enjoying the content at all, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, that way I can bring more of this to you. This card has fallen apart, again with the cancellations, the replacement fights, the postponements. But the show must go on, and the UFC still has given us about 10, 11. It's hard to tell at this point how many fights are left, but they got a show for us, and we got a little bit to work with. With so few fights and the way that everything's been shaking out, I could see the ownership this week being extremely condensed. I expect guys like Giga, Brandon Royval, and Brian Kelleher and TJ Brown to come in with the highest ownership. Those are probably going to be 4 of the 5 highest owned fighters on the slate. Giga Chikadze is going to come in at high ownership, obviously. If you take a look, he's one of the biggest favorites. I think he's the 3rd biggest favorite on the card. He's in the main event. He's probably going to score a decent amount of points. He has 5 rounds to work with. If you're playing cash games, you definitely want to play Giga and Calvin Kattar. But if you're playing tournaments, you should play Giga Chikadze, and I expect most of the field to be doing that. He's probably going to be the highest owned, if not the highest owned fighter this week. But it's for good reason. And again, I do expect Brandon Royval to come in at pretty high ownership as well, just being a popular play most of the time that he's on DraftKings. It is a little strange to me that his fight with Rogerio Bontorin isn't the co-main event. When you look at the co-main event, you have 2 of maybe the worst heavyweights in the UFC versus the fight right before that with Brandon Royval and Bontorin. It's kind of weird to me that they're even in that spot, but I still expect him to see heavy ownership despite not being part of the co-main event. But the more interesting plays of the slate come down here past all this red garbage. When we look at Brian Kelleher, he's now going to be fighting Kevin Kroom. So if you don't know, he was originally scheduled to fight Saad Yakub Krakhmanov. Saad Yakub withdrew from the fight, but it's weird because now he's rebooked to fight Cody Stamann next week. So I don't know how any of that is working. But what I do know is that Kevin Kroom is stepping in on short notice to fight Boom Kelleher here, and I think that makes Brian Kelleher maybe the best play on the slate. Brian Kelleher is coming in as a 3-1 favorite on most books, and money continues to come in on him. This is going to be at featherweight, so it's going to be at a weight class higher than what he's been competing in recently. On top of that, Kroom is going to have a huge height and reach advantage, but I expect the power to lie on the side of Brian Kelleher, and I think he's going to do a better job of managing where the fight goes. At -300 for 7,500 on DraftKings, it's a no-brainer, and that's why I expect him to be one of the highest owned players on the slate, because you'd be foolish to not play somebody who's getting that much respect from Vegas at this price point. Same could be said for TJ Brown. Originally, he was supposed to fight Gabriel Benitez. Now you're looking at a situation where he's going to be fighting Charles Rosa, and with the way that the line has opened and the way that the line has moved, he's become the 2nd biggest favorite on the card behind Brian Kelleher. So now the 3 biggest favorites on the card are Brian Kelleher, TJ Brown, and Giga Chikadze in that order. So the cool part about this slate is that you can roster the 3 biggest favorites on the card and have more salary remaining than what you started with per fighter, that is. And I'll show you what I mean. So when you start building your roster, you get $50,000 of salary, $83.33 per fighter. So if we wanted to, we could take Giga, we could take Brian Kelleher down here at 7,500, and then TJ Brown at 7,100, and you'll notice that the average remaining player salary is actually higher than what we started with. So we're coming in basically below budget here because of these low cost plays that are now huge favorites. So with that being said, what we can do is afford these more expensive plays comfortably, and we can target the mid-range as well. So we're not looking at some of these plays that we're not super confident in, like Chase Sherman, for example, who's a dog that I think is going to go over-owned. If we took a look, you could afford somebody like Vyacheslav Borshev at 9,000, Caitlin Chookagian at 8,900, Brandon Royval, again, I think he's going to be a popular play. But even with somebody like Brandon Royval, you still are at 8,650, so if you wanted to go to Holmes and you wanted to roster burrito, then you're only leaving 100 left over, and you've got a lineup with basically 6 favorites. So I think this is probably what you're going to do, or if you want to get a little bit different, maybe plug in somebody like Jake Collier in place of one of these guys who are 8,600. If you really wanted to get different, you could take out one of these 3 guys that we were talking about before, maybe replace it with somebody like Dakota Bush, who I think has good upside, and now you've kind of spent all the salary. But just like any other week, you don't need to spend all the salary that they're giving you. And honestly, this week you could get away with leaving 1,000 salary on the table and still having a pretty good lineup and still having a pretty different lineup. So if we did the same thing, we got these 3 favorites that we like, then we can get somebody like Ramiz Brahimaj, for example. We can go up to Joe Anderson Brito. We can go up to Joe Holmes, and now you're looking at a situation where you've left 1,000 salary on the table, and you have one of the lower owned plays in Ramiz Brahimaj to kind of balance out ownership within your lineup. This is another way that you can attack it, and I mean, if this isn't terrible, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay to leave the money there, I promise. I promise. And just to kind of touch on Joe Holmes for a second, because he is making his UFC debut, Ugly Man Joe looks like a great play this week. The reason why I say that is because Jamie Pickett, if you've looked at his UFC career, he leaves a lot to be desired. Now, we were on Pickett in his last fight against Staropoli, where he was able to control the pace of the fight, he was able to grapple successfully in spots, and he was able to get a unanimous decision victory as a result. But Joe Holmes is going to come in here at 6 foot 4 inches tall, 80 inches of reach, just like Jamie Pickett. But he's got these long arms, this long frame. I could see Jamie Pickett having a lot of trouble trying to control the pace of the fight against somebody like Joe Holmes, just because of that distance, but also because of the striking that Pickett's going to be having to deal with throughout the 15 minutes. And if he comes out and looks to overwhelm Jamie Pickett, kind of like Jordan Wright did, I think that he can actually put Pickett away, which isn't easy. Pickett's not an easy guy to put away, but we've seen that it's possible, especially if you're able to overwhelm him early. With the expensive options like Giga, Borshev, Royval, and the cheaper options that have opened up for us because of these replacements, I could see somebody like Joe Holmes, who's being added to the card later, is making his UFC debut, coming in at lower ownership, so this might be a good leverage spot for us as well. Honestly, I can see this mid-range going lower owned than it probably should. Guys like Brito, Holmes, Collier, Brahimaj, I could see these guys going lower owned, but I'm pretty confident in that. I'm pretty confident in us using these lower options, mixing in some mid-range options, and that's a good way for us to get different this week. And I know we talked about it earlier in the week. I'm going to touch on it again. I wholeheartedly believe Vyacheslav Borshev is a trap. I don't want to get caught up with a guy who's making his debut, is surrounded by a lot of hype, and he's fighting somebody with strong grappling like Dakota Bush, who might be able to surprise him, and who also has UFC experience already. I expect ownership to be on Borshev. I could totally be wrong about it, but Dakota Bush is still my pick for that fight. I know that I said in the first look that my mind could change, but I like Dakota Bush this week to get the job done over what might be a little bit of a hype job, to be honest with you. And I want to finish off by building a lineup that I think if you're playing larger field stuff, because I know a lot of you out there do, I want to build a lineup here that's going to scream weird, scream unique, and something that you might be able to plug in or at least work with when building your lineups to create something that's going to put you in a position to win the money because you're playing against thousands of other people. Giga, unfadable, in my opinion. There's actually been some love coming in on Calvin Kattar just publicly. I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, Calvin Kattar's being overlooked. Oh, Giga's going to get tired, this, and that. I don't think so. I think Calvin Kattar has a style that's tailor-made for somebody like Giga Chikadze, who's going to be able to pick him apart from the outside, control the pace on the outside, use his lateral movements. So Giga Chikadze is a great play, and I will put him in this lineup even though we're trying to get different. Again, I think Caitlin Chookagian is going to come in at single-digit ownership. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 3, 4, 5% in most of your contests. I don't think people are dying to play Rogerio Bontorin. I don't think that he's going to win, but I don't think he's completely outgunned here either. He's a very talented flyweight. Brandon Royval is coming off 2 losses. Those 2 losses are to the best 2 fighters in the division, but you don't know what that does to his confidence. Rogerio Bontorin at this price, if he gets it done, is probably going to score a decent amount of points. Ramiz Brahimaj at 7,900. I expect him to win. I wouldn't pay favorite money for Court McGee, and we did talk about in the first look how Brahimaj, with the way that the line is moving, is probably going to end up being the favorite by the time Saturday night comes around, and by the time of me recording this, he's already at minus 120 from what I saw on DraftKings Sportsbook. So I'll take that at 7,900, and I do think that people are going to be off of him. Now, this is where you have to grab one of these guys, I think. I think you either have to grab TJ Brown or Brian Kelleher. I personally think that TJ Brown is the safer play. I do expect more people to be on Brian Kelleher, so for the sake of this lineup that we're putting together, I'm going to take a shot on TJ Brown here. Leaves us with 9,400. So with 9,400 left, I think I would roster either Joe Anderson Burrito or Joe Holmes at this point. So let's say we put Burrito in there. 800 left. You've got 3 fighters at least here that are going to be pulling very, very low ownership. And that's going to put you in a position to get some leverage on the field. So if you're playing larger field stuff, take a look at the fighters that we just talked about, because I think those are going to be huge difference makers if they end up winning their fights. Those are my final plays. Those are my final picks. Thank you so much for watching. As always, like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way I can bring more of this to you.